So Marvel's mutant god dies, and it's amazing. Check this out. I'm really excited to see how you guys feel about this whole thing. Let's check this out. What this does here is this initially opens up with Hope Summers and Exodus. Now, here's the thing to understand here. By the time we get to the end of this first little tidbit, we're gonna have to do a bit of an explanation about Hope Summers to understand why all of this matters. But what it does is it opens up with Hope Summers and it opens up with Exodus, the two of them working side by side. And what ends up going on is they're basically launching an attack of sorts by effectively taking out any and everybody who's considered to be competition or effectively standing against the power of the Diamond Sinister group, right? Because remember, what's going on in Sins of Sinister is you effectively have a religious civil war. That's really all this is, right? You've got the diamond-headed Sinister who all these folks like Hope Summers initially served and then ultimately defected from. And then you have the Mother Righteous, right? So the versions of Sinister with the hearts on their heads. Basically all the Nightcrawlers is really all they are. And then you have Storm and her Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. But everybody's just kind of trying to live, right? And so what goes on here is Hope Summers, as she's given to us, is pretty dark and pretty sinister, which is really interesting given the nature of her character. But what they do is that by traveling around and eradicating competition, they ended up targeting the combination of the Kree and the Skrull empires, which have long since been unified. And that what they do is that in this attack, they blow up the entire world. Now, this is probably one of the coolest things that Marvel's done with regards to the X-Men. That's why I love this idea of creating different mutants by merging different powers together. So what they have here is what's called an L-bomb. And an L-bomb, as it's described, is a 4-gift chimera. It's unstable, so they're stored in a Tempest stasis vault until they're needed. Anyone with Lila Cheney's gift can teleport to anywhere they've been in the universe. And when they get my psychic imprint of the destination, they're good to go. The L-bomb arrives, and the other 3 gene payloads kick in: Firestar, Leland, and Micromax. Now, here's the benefit of this, right? So each one of these people that we're talking about here all have a very unique power that when it's combined is just catastrophic. So Firestar is literally just a walking nuclear reactor, right? Leyland had the ability to manipulate gravitational mass. Those of you guys who remember the old Phoenix Saga, I'm sorry, the Dark Phoenix Saga back in the day, when the X-Men confronted the Hellfire Club, and you had that guy who was just kind of like, he looked like a really fat dude, that's Leland, right? He could manipulate the gravitational pull of objects and make any member of the X-Men, or even all of them, feel heavier than they actually are. And Micromax is basically a mutant that has the powers of Hank Pym, right? He can shrink and he can grow. By combining these things together, right? Nuclear fusion, an increase in gravity, and growth and shrinking, what does that give you? It gives you a nuclear explosion on a planetary scale, big enough to wipe out an entire world. So quite literally, the L-bombs are the result of the mutant population fusing powers together to create a nuclear bomb that can not only detonate using the powers of Firestar, that's the whole basis behind it, but using the gravitational powers of Leland can effectively increase the gravitational mass of the bomb, but then with the power of Micromax, expand the explosion outward. So it's kind of nuts. They basically created a bomb that can blow up worlds, and that's what Hope Summers is doing. She's just traveling around the cosmos, eradicating entire worlds and wiping out whole civilizations. More so than that, one of the things that she talks about here, at least when she's having this conversation with Exodus, is she says, I don't clone well, right? Only one of me at once, it seems. Sinister said something about it being a similar problem with Jean. Now, what she's referring to here, and this is one of those where if you don't know the history of the X-Men, it's lost on you. What she's talking about here is Madeline Pryor. So way back in the day, in the aftermath of the Phoenix Saga, and even partly leading up to the Phoenix Saga, that Sinister had come to the realization that if Cyclops and Jean Grey were to ever have a child, that child would be astronomically powerful. One of them was Rachel Summers, who came from Days of Future Past and eventually became a host for the Phoenix. And the other is kind of Cable, but not really. I say not really Cable because the attempt of Sinister with cloning Jean Grey came as being Madeline Pryor, but she lacked all the powers of Jean. But the result was that when she and Cyclops basically banged, they ended up producing Cable. And so effectively the genetic potential of Jean and Cyclops came to bear when Cyclops and Madeline Pryor, the clone of Jean, ended up procreating, because Cable's one of the most powerful mutants to ever exist. You don't see it all that often because the techno-organic virus is constantly eating away at him, but Strife is the clone of Cable, and Strife is a beast. This guy's an absolute hoss, right? It's nuts. But it's one of those cool things because she says, my discarded bits can synergize with all the duplicates of my old crew and keep the Resurrection Industrial Complex ticking over. True resurrection isn't quite as important now that we've got the cloned vats, but the clones are not OG Krakoa. We're just a superior method. Now, here's the thing to understand about Hope Summers, and this is when we kind of have to get into a little bit of her history, right? This is why she's so important here. So wind the clock back to the aftermath of House of M in Marvel Comics, right? The Scarlet Witch takes away 98% of the mutant population's powers. At that point in time, there were only 198 mutants on Earth, and no new mutants were being born, right? That was basically it. What ended up happening is Marvel wrote a story called Messiah Complex, which we have covered, and you'll find a link to it pinned in the comment, where we ended up finding out that there was a girl that was born in, I want to say Anchorage, Alaska. I can't remember off the top of my head, but we never found out her real name because her parents were basically killed. What ended up happening is that it was a mad dash by multiple groups. William Stryker and his Purifiers, right, the religious fanatics that want to kill mutants, they were hunting after this little girl. Sinister and his Marauders were hunting after this girl, and so were the X-Men. We ended up finding out Cable was the one that got to her ahead of time, and Cable basically ended up rescuing this girl. But the cool thing is that Hope Summers is the first mutant born since the events of House of M. The reason why that matters is because she was kind of like the Messiah, because after Hope Summers came along, other mutants started being born again. And so for whatever reason that almost follows a kind of religious fervor, people view her as the mutant messiah. That's where she got that name from. But basically you ended up learning that what Hope Summers can do is copy the powers of any mutant around her, and there is no upper limit. So she's astronomically powerful. She can copy the abilities of reality warpers, Omega level telepaths, the whole 9 yards. There's no cap there. And so I want you to keep that whole mutant messiah bit of history in the back of your head, because it'll become important here in a minute. But one of the issues that they have is that while they can't duplicate her, her ability to synergize the powers of everybody that's on her crew, that comes from just her inherent abilities, right? Her inherent powers. The problem with this is that Sinister, the Red Diamond Sinister, is still among their ranks. And what he reveals to them is what's called Rasputin IV, which is basically the perfect mutant that has been built by Sinister using a multitude of powers. Now, the cool thing about Rasputin IV is she is arguably one of the most capable mutants that we've ever seen in Marvel Comics. She's not all powerful, right? The nature of her character, or at least the nature of her abilities, by having 5 different powers planted inside of her, she has the osmium metal skin of Colossus. She's got the intangibility of Kitty Pryde, right? She has the super strength that comes with Colossus as well. She's got the force field of Unis the Untouchable. She has the healing factor of X-23 Laura Kinney, and then she's got the telepathy of Quentin Quire. So she is wildly powerful, right? She's really capable in what she can do. And so it's one of these moments where when she displays her powers, one of the things to remember is that when we covered the first issue of Immoral X-Men, the only way the Council would keep Sinister alive is if he kept producing more and more powerful mutants for them. But in his statement to them about Rasputin IV, what he says is, this is it, right? There's no possible way to give a person 6 powers. This is the maximum that I can possibly offer. And in doing so, effectively seals his own fate. He basically tells them, I can't do anything more for them or more for you guys. And so in essence, it's like, well, then we have no more use for Sinister anymore. This guy's gotta go. And so Sinister picks up on that relatively quickly, right? He picks up on it pretty fast and comes to this realization that his days are numbered and it's only a matter of time before they kill him off. And so jump back to Hope Summers alongside Exodus. Now, Hope Summers, unlike her regular counterpart, right, the one that came before her, this one is truly a clone. And because of that, the kind of messiah viewpoint that people have of her has gone to her head. She's become power hungry and just sort of a warlord. And so going through and just eradicating all these different races, what ends up happening is effectively her powers are shut off and she's left for dead, right? Like she's been duplicating the power of Exodus, and Exodus is now shut off her ability to access his powers. And he says, like, I am not with you. You are just a girl with a gun. You are of no more use to the council or your church. I am the church, and the church is bigger than you. A Messiah's purpose is to inspire a church, to pray that one day they will return. That a Messiah is with us diminishes them. It makes true faith impossible. For who could truly believe in such a petulant, childish girl? You are of more use to us dead than alive. And he basically leaves her there on that world, and she is ultimately killed by the Chitauri forces that she's been trying to wipe out. Now, here's a really important thing about this. This is why I said I want you to keep that kind of religious perspective of Hope Summers in the back of your head. When the mutants started coming back into existence as a result of seemingly the birth of Hope Summers, Exodus viewed her as like her most loyal religious follower. He saw her as a messiah, not a god, but as a messiah, the second coming of the mutant population. And so he has been loyal to her resolutely since she first popped up on the scene and the two of them encountered each other. What's so important about this is that despite him saying things like, you know, the Messiah needs to have a person that's prophesied to return and yada, 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 the truth about it is he has no more faith in her. He doesn't believe that she's the person she's supposed to be. And so leaving her for dead, right, saying that you are more used to us dead than you are alive, basically says that people are losing faith in you. They're losing faith in what your church stands for, but I will take over for that. I will preach the gospel. I will make up stories about how you perished, and one day you shall return for all of us and lead us into a better future. That kind of a thing, right? So it's probably a mad power grab, but it's cool. The funny thing about this is that things are going to go sideways for Exodus fast, right? Now, following that, you jump back over to Sinister when he's having a conversation with Rasputin, and what he says here is, in effect, he screwed everything up. He even goes as far as telling her about like Krakoa, right? That in the early days of Krakoa, when he sat on the Quiet Council and Krakoa was first formed, it was a lush garden. It was a beautiful place. And in his mad dash for power, in his desire to control everything, right? To conquer all existence, that he set the universe onto the path that it is now. Because remember, when it comes to Sins of Sinister, what he had secretly been doing was planting his own influence or his own kind of backdoor, so to speak, in the minds of every single X-Men that was resurrected. So when the time came, he could seize control of them. And he did, right? For a time, he had total control of the X-Men and was leading a full-scale conquering of the world. But over time, the X-Men started to rebel against his influence. And the result is that they ultimately turned on him, leading him to where he is now. If he has no use, they kill him off. And so if for no other reason than self-preservation, what he does is he tells Rasputin IV that their mission now needs to be to quote-unquote fix the universe, that he knows a way to do it and he needs her help to achieve it. And she ultimately joins him. Now, what's so cool about this is that on this quest that they have to basically reach this place in the universe where they need to attain this kind of artifact or this tool in order to save everything, that what they do is pass through all these crazy and somewhat wonky locations, right? These places that are kind of dark and kind of screwed up at the same time, but it's really just sort of the aftermath of everything that's been going on. Because by the time this third issue picks up, 900 years have passed. Remember, Sins of Sinister takes place in 3 phases. All the number 1 issues, so Immoral X-Men, Nightcrawler, Storm, and the Brotherhood, those are all year 10. All the number 2s are year 100, and all the number 3s are year 1000. So we're 900 years later, and they're no closer to finding this artifact than they were when they first started. But what they end up doing is coming across what's referred to as an Exodus world. And that what ended up happening is that following Exodus, basically taking out Hope Summers and kind of rallying the entire religion around himself, things transpired exactly as you thought they would. It turned into a religious civil war, that you ended up having people who were basically decrying the influence of Exodus. And so as opposed to Exodus being this singular, uber powerful person that we know, what ended up happening is that by whatever manner and whatever means, basically each one of these Exodus worlds is their own religious sect, and that they have their own version of Exodus that is their kind of protector. And so what happens is that when Rasputin IV gets to this world, and she's able to attain this artifact, or at least read the minds of the various people who are here to find the location of this artifact, she accidentally wakes up one of the Exodus. Now, of course, she teleports away, but in this Exodus making its move and leaving the world, what it does is it violates the treaty among all the Exodus worlds that all agreed, you stay away, we stay away. You stay on your world, we stay on our world, and that's it. By basically violating it, now war is on. And so ultimately the entire civil war kicks off, and all these Exodus armies and all these Exodus religions start waging war against each other. Now, we don't get to actually see how it plays out, which kind of sucks, because to be honest with you guys, Exodus is an Omega level telepath. I would love to see how a civil war among the religious groups led by different versions of himself would all end up coming into conflict with each other and how it would turn out. I feel like that was a huge missed opportunity, and maybe Marvel brings it back at some point in the future. But we end up basically following Sinister and Rasputin as they make their way forward trying to locate this artifact. As they pass through different points in this universe, we learn different things. Kitty Pryde, for example, is no longer the young, jovial, fun member of the X-Men that we grew up with with reading Chris Claremont's run. Now she's literally a space pirate, just like traveling around the universe and just wiping out entire groups, like pillaging and plundering and all that kind of stuff. We end up finding out that at some point along the line, Ileana Rasputin, the younger sister of Colossus, with the power to manipulate magic, she had tried to bring the demonic realm of Limbo into the universe and was unsuccessful, but it left these kind of holes, right? These sort of portals in all these different places around the universe, and different versions of Colossus all stand guard in front of these portals, annihilating anybody who tries to enter. It's kind of cool, right? It's really, really awesome the way this whole thing has happened. But once we follow them to their destination, they end up finding the artifact, the very thing that they were looking for. And Sinister, as he kind of talks to this girl, sort of muses with himself and saying, like, this is the thing that will fix our problems. And so when he sits down and listens to it, it's a message from destiny. Right now, here's the thing. Once we get to oh my God, Nightcrawlers, right? Nightcrawlers number 3, basically the conclusion of Sins of Sinister, you're gonna see just how far-reaching the precognitive abilities of Destiny are, because she basically set in motion events that were guaranteed to have this one particular outcome. And it's because of this one thing that the X-Men did at the very beginning of Sins of Sinister, when they shot the Juggernaut into space. Because of that one thing, it all comes home to roost, right? It's one of the coolest things. It's one of the coolest moments in Sins of Sinister, right? But literally in her message to Nathaniel Essex, right, to Sinister, she says, I stole your lab with Storm, Stellaris, and the Iraqi. If you're listening to this, they will have hidden it again when I tried to reset the universe. This will be because Raven is dead. And if Raven is dead, oh God, I hate myself. She would hate me for this. Nathaniel, if you get back your Moras and you return to the past, come to me, I will join you. Now remember, just kind of reiterate here, the Moira MacTaggart's, right? Moira MacTaggart's power is that whenever she dies, the universe resets. And so when Storm and the Brotherhood realized that was the case, they stole the Moiras from Mr. Sinister so he couldn't kill one, reset the universe, give himself all the information he needs to know to understand how to ensure that he succeeds this time around, right? To like keep things out of being a vicious cycle. So it's kind of a cool moment because she says, yes, I fought you, I didn't trust you with your plans, and I also know it is impossible for you to trust anyone, but you must try now. I am trying to find a way to save Mystique. I see the future and there is only death for her. It's horrible. To see the woman you love torn asunder so many times, I know you can't understand. Your nightmare dimension was the longest path of her life, so I followed it. She beat the odds so many times, and I tried to be hopeful. No world is truly a hell with her in it. Now, if she's gone again, we must try again, and perhaps I can discern another route alongside yours. It's a really cool moment because, again, this recording comes from 1, before Destiny died, and 2, before the death of Mystique. But remember, the only thing Destiny cares about, the only thing that matters to her, is that her and Mystique have a life together. That's it, right? She would let the world burn. She'd let the universe set on fire if it means that her and Mystique could find a way to live a life together. But once Mystique is dead, the response of Destiny is, then all bets are off, right? If allying myself with Sinister and telling him where the Moiras are so he can kill one and then reset everything, if that's the price that needs to be paid in order for myself and Mystique to have a life together, then I will doom a universe to do it, right? So it's really cool the way this happens. And so what she says is, she says, one more thing. I know your eventual goal is to transcend time and space to become a Dominion. You do not succeed. I know you'll think I'm trying to trick you, but this is your only hope, Nathaniel. Give up. Now, that's one of the things to keep in mind, and this all went back to Jonathan Hickman's initial run on the X-Men, House and Powers of X. If you guys recall, during that story, we had what were called the post-humans. Basically, this idea that humanity kind of merges itself with a cybernetic organism, right? Humanity becomes cyborgs, and then at a future point in time, the Phalanx would show up to Earth, having traveled to so many different worlds. And if they deem that world technologically advanced enough, it merges with the Phalanx. That's what the post-humanity landscape was looking for, which of course would lead to the eradication of the entirety of the mutant population. Sinister wanted to beat him to the punch, right? He wanted to attain this absolute, this astronomical level of power for himself. And so that's always been his goal. But her telling him, you will not achieve your goal, you will not get to where you're looking for, then the only real option Sinister has is to say, okay, fine, then we have to wipe out, we have to kill one of the Moiras and reset the universe. Because Destiny's precognitive abilities are not to be defied. And even Sinister himself, despite his vanity, despite his level of power, despite his lust for absolute power, even he knows better than to question what destiny tells him. And so when this conversation, or really this kind of message between Destiny and Sinister ends, that's when Rasputin IV shows up and realizes that Sinister's not going to save the universe. He's going to kill one of the Moiras and wipe it out. And her desire to continue living runs in direct conflict with that. Now, this is one of the things that I love about this, because if this story was written in like 1995, right, then she would have said, well, then let's find a way to reset everything, but let's make sure that I get back to the main Marvel universe. And they would have just rolled her over into the main Marvel universe, and she would have just had a role or established a role for herself going forward. Here, it's, nope, we're gonna blink this universe out. And if you happen to make it through, that's cool. But at the end of the day, like, she's fighting for her own survival as opposed to allying with Sinister and then trying to find a way to make it out alive. Now, what's really interesting about this is Sinister literally tells her, I gave you a whole host of abilities. I made you the perfect Rasputin, or the perfect chimera, right? You've got like 5 different powers. And he says, but there's one power that I never gave you. That's the power of flight. And so he literally jettisons her out of the airlock. Like, he shoots her out of the airlock and she's just stranded in space. She'll survive, but she's just stuck out in space, just floating out there seemingly for eternity. And then Sinister continues on his mission, where he ultimately ends up traveling to what is, by all standards of measurement, Earth. Now, here's the cool thing about this. It doesn't look like Earth. It looks like a giant fungal kind of thing. There's a reason for that, and that's actually covered in Nightcrawlers. It's a result of a guy named Dr. Nemesis, who's basically merged with all the fungi across the universe and has just kind of turned everything into fungus. It's weird, it's wonky, but when Sinister gets there, he encounters 2 people, one of whom is a Doombot, and the second is a robot version of Moira McTaggart. It's why he doesn't just kill her on the spot and then reset everything. But what he tells her is, our mission here, our goal, is to find a way in, to basically find these Moiras that were taken by Storm and her Brotherhood, kill one, reset everything, and call it a day. And this robot Moira is perfectly fine with it. She's like, yep, that's exactly what we need to do. More so than that, 1,000 years in the future, Emma Frost, with her traditional diamond form, she's no longer in her diamond form. I mean, she has it, but she doesn't use it. Instead, what ended up happening is she merged with a portion of the Crimson Gem of Sidorak. So she seemingly is kind of like an earthly avatar for Sidorak, the demonic entity itself, but she has this Sidorak diamond form, or the Sidorak stone form. It's cool because seemingly her level of power is astronomical. More so than that, she's informed by Beast, who again, under control of Sinister, that Sinister himself is still alive because they believed he had died. Right? In this 900-year period when he had just disappeared with Rasputin IV, they assumed he had just been killed. And whether it was due to their hubris or just the fact that they didn't really need him anymore, they never had a reason to go looking. They just didn't really care whether or not he was there because they never took him seriously enough to be any measure of a credible threat. And so what ends up happening is, jumping back with Sinister, he travels back to the base of Storm and the Brotherhood of Mutants, who basically have been operating without Storm seemingly ever since she died. And of course, he's met by John Ironfire, who was the second in command to Storm. The problem is that, of course, Ironfire is a lot older than he used to be, and in this conversation with Sinister, Sinister literally says, I'm trying to find the Moiras and all that kind of good stuff. But before we actually find out what happens there, we jump back to Rasputin for her to be met with a telepathic communication where a person pleads with her case, right? They literally tell her, I understand where you're coming from. You seem to have gotten yourself in a pickle. You have been played poorly, my sweet thing. The man who did you dirty is running here and there, free and all naughty. I should ask you what you most regret, but it's written all over your shiny face. You regret trusting him. Do you want revenge? And the response of Rasputin is, more than anything. And the person says, good. Then the real question is, do you want to make a deal? And so seemingly, everybody's gunning after Sinister now. And all this is going to come to a head in the final part of this whole arc, which is amazing because what's going to blow your minds, in the video that we get to when we cover the Nightcrawlers, we're going to see Galactus. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.